bit later. But we're going to be talking about the topic is that's apocalypticism is the word. You know, it sounds bigger than what it is. It's really not that big of a word. I'm going to read an opening text, and when I read it, I would like for somebody, any volunteer can just shout it out and tell me what I'm reading. 2 Kings chapter 15. 2 Kings 15. I'm going to read verses 1 through 6. And I just want you, when we read through it, I just want you to tell me what's happening. It says that in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea the son of Elah to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel which were before him. And against him came up Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, and Hoshea became a servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy, and Hoshea found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to king of Egypt, and fix it just like that. Y'all are letting me read it and didn't match, but they know what I'm saying. Shameful. Shameful. Somebody just said something. So, 2 Kings 17. Now we're all together. So we already read about Ahaz. He's the king of Judah. Hoshea is the king of Israel, and there's conspiracy happening. So we'll pick up at verse 4. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, the king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria. So he paid money to Egypt, but he didn't give any money to Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up, bound him in prison. I'll read a couple more verses. The king of Assyria came up throughout the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it in 3 years. And in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried away Israel into Syria and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan in the city of the Medes. What's happening here? If it doesn't come to you immediately, that's a problem. It should. It is one of the most significant events in the Bible, so it should come to you readily. This is the Assyrian captivity. This is one of the singular, most important events in the Bible. And so, this is the Assyrian captivity. The reason why I took the time to read that is for this cause. Throughout history, there are watershed moments that change the trajectory of lives, cultures, and nations and peoples. And this is true of the Bible. There are several moments in the Bible that change the trajectory of the world. Not just Judaism or the Abrahamic religions, but the whole world is changed by these moments. Like when Abraham responded to the call. That changed the course of the world. Because Abraham responded, Christianity came to be and the world was shaped as such. The people of Israel coming out of Egypt, that moment of deliverance has become an anthem of liberation for the oppressed all over the world for centuries. These are moments that shape the world. But there is a moment that I think has as equal impact, especially for Christians, as the moment to which Abraham responded to the call of God, and that is the captivity. This one that we read was the Assyrian captivity. You could also find in the Bible the Babylonian captivity. The reason why there's two captivities is because Israel was two distinct nations. There was a northern kingdom that had 10 of the tribes, and the southern kingdom that had 2 of the tribes. The northern kingdom had all wicked kings, and in 722 BC, the nation of Assyria overran them and took them out. Assyria was toppled by Babylon with the help of the Persian Empire. And so then Babylon becomes a world power, and Babylon takes the southern kingdom. That's in 586 BC. Those two events are important. You don't need to know a lot of dates in the Bible, but you should know those dates because the influence of this captivity radically changed the direction of the Jewish people. Now, if you read scholarship, they'll make a claim that I don't quite agree with, so I won't go that direction. But I think there's another way to assess the material. If you're paying attention and you're being sharp and you're really reading your Bible slowly, it would seem to be that the sort of religion that, let's say, Jacob practiced would be very different than a sort of religion that Nehemiah practiced. It would feel very different. Just to name a few things, I'll name one thing. It seems to be that Jacob worshipped and did sacrifices everywhere. There's multiple places where you could do sacrifice, but much later on, there was only one place where you did sacrifices, and that was at the temple. Just one example. And so scholars, particularly liberal scholars, say that from Genesis throughout to the end of the Old Testament, we see what's called a development of theology. I don't agree. I don't think that's what's happening. I think the central beliefs of ancient Judaism, and I believe that's consistent throughout. What we're seeing is the people who practice that religion, as time progresses, come to practice it in the way that God would have his people to practice it. That's what's happening. We're seeing a change of attitude. If I could, and I want to make sure I understand what I'm saying. If you were to do an interview with a Jewish person, let's say 940, 950 BC, this is around the time of David, Solomon era. You ask the typical person what they believed. Actually, no, I won't go that far back. Let's say after Rehoboam. So the kingdom is split. And you ask a typical person, what do you believe? They would probably be polytheist. Just because the average Jew was probably polytheist doesn't mean that that's the religion that God was ascribing to. That's not what I'm suggesting, but that's what they believed. And you say, well, Pastor, how do you know that? Because the prophets spent so much time telling them to stop doing what? Worshiping other gods. If they weren't polytheists, then they wouldn't be worshiping other gods. They worship Baal a lot, and Ashtaroth a lot, and Moloch a lot, and Chemosh a lot, right? And so they were giving their attention to other gods. So most Jews, for a lot of their history, they were fairly polytheistic. But if you were to have that same conversation after the captivity, they'd be pretty monotheistic. The practice of the people changed radically. Not the message the Bible was communicating. It was monotheism throughout, but their practice started to align. And I think along with their practice, I think the focus of God's revelation also changed after the captivity. And I think what we see that emerges after the captivity is what is called apocalypticism. We don't see much trace of this, and I'm going to explain what that means. We don't see very many of those ideas before the captivity. But they're all throughout after and all throughout the New Testament. And so that's why I think, and I'll say this, and I'm going to repeat this later. If you remove apocalyptic thinking from the New Testament, there is no Christianity. That is how important these ideas are. You cannot be a Christian and not have these views. It's not possible. And these views came into the limelight after the exile. So that's why I think the exile is important, and it pivoted to people to be in a place to receive a greater understanding of who God is. Not that the ideas weren't true before, it's just that they were in a place to hear God speak in such a way. It'd be easy for them to receive. So with that, let's talk a little bit about this. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk about apocalyptic literature first, then I'm going to talk about it as a movement, and then I'm going to talk about how we see it in Christianity in our New Testament, okay? So my 3 steps. The reason why I'm starting with the literature, because I am persuaded that the movement emerged out of the literature. So we have to know something about the literature. The word apocalyptic, or apocalypse, comes from the Greek word apokalypsis. So we're going to be talking about apocalyptic literature. Let's see. This is a hard word, huh? Keep forgetting the Y. Elliptic. The literature has 2 major categories. I'll have that on the board. I'm ahead of myself, but I just want you to have it for later. Okay. Journey that at top, apocalypticism, can you erase that? The very top. Okay. So the Greek, where we have this word is what we call revelation is the Greek word apocalypse is what it is. So I love it when scholars do that, when they call it the apocalypse of John. That sounds so much cooler because it's just what it is. And so, man, if we could adopt that, that would be so cool. Let's turn to the apocalypse of John. It sounds so much weightier, much more gravity. But apocalyptic literature is this. I'm going to read this slowly. It's a genre of revelatory literature. And what I mean by that, you have to understand the definition of apocalypsis, right? It's to lay bare. It's pulling back the curtain. It's John was looking into the heavens, and it was peeled back so he could see deeper realities. It's a revelation. It's a revelation. So it's not that this person's just having a time of meditation. Something is being revealed to them. And this revelatory literature is normally done within a narrative framework, and the revelation is usually mediated by a otherworldly being. That's important. So think about the book of Revelation, right? Jesus, he gets a vision of Jesus, and Jesus begins to speak to him on the island of Patmos, and this is a resurrected Jesus in his glory, and he begins to share the book with him, right? So the vision, if you remember, is all being told by Jesus to John. Think about the book of Daniel. He's having these visions, and they're being explained to him by an angel, right? So you're having this revelation, but there's also someone to either deliver the message and or interpret it. So it's a revelatory literature that is mediated by an otherworldly being, disclosing a transcendent reality. And there's 2 major types, and we'll get into that in just a second. There's some features of this literature. If you could go to my notes, and then I'm on Roman numeral 2, letter C. Copy that and drop that in the Slack, because I'm going to use some words here, and it might be helpful just for you to be able to read it. There's 6 features that are associated with this kind of literature. Okay. And I'm talking slowly because I've had the pleasure of reading this in a book, and you guys are hearing it. So I recognize it's more difficult to capture that way. And so I want to review this again, the definition. It's literature that's a revelation. That's the first part of the definition. 2, it's mediated by an otherworldly being. So it's a mediated message. So either Jesus himself or an angel is communicating the message. And 3, it's disclosing transcendent reality. So it's allowing you, or to explain that last one, you're getting to see behind the curtains, right? It's the BTS of reality, the behind the scenes, okay? And so that's the definition. So when you're reading apocalyptic literature, you're looking for these features. This is what you're looking for, 6 features. Were you able to find it in the notes? Did you drop it in the Slack? Perfect. 1 is called a discourse cycle. 2, spiritual turmoils. 3, paranetic discourses. I'm going to define some of these. 4, pseudonymity. 5, mythical imagery. And 6, composite character. I'm going to define a couple of these. The rest you're going to have to look up, because if I want to slow down all of it, that'd be the whole lesson. So I'm going to go a little bit. Discourse cycle. What I mean by that, there's a pattern that tends to happen in this sort of literature. And that's what they mean by discourse cycle. Discourse cycle just means pattern. So there's they receive the revelation, symbols are presented, an interpretation is given, it's applied to history. Now, in light of all this, you need to live right. And that's the cycle. Journey, I want you to copy that. So, Roman numeral 2, C, 1, and then the dashes where it says revelation, down to ethical exhortation. Copy that part, drop it. This is the discourse cycle. Wow, man, you put a whole lot in there. So, okay, but that's fine. So they have it. That's okay. And so to simplify that, the discourse cycle is the flow of how it works. Like Daniel is the description of him receiving the vision itself, the interpretation of the vision, how it applies to history, and then now that you have this, now you need to live different. That's what repeats. We're looking for that. The other thing that you'll see is that it's called pseudonymity. That means it's anonymous. In our Bible, our apocalyptic literature isn't anonymous. It's Daniel and John. But a lot of the other ones, they're ascribed to people of old, like Enoch. There's other ones that are ascribed to John, but John didn't actually write, just to give a couple of examples. But paraenetic discourse is a fancy way of saying, once you have heard the message, now live right. Think about Revelation, right? When you get to the end of Revelation, how does Revelation end, right? Revelation 22 says this at the end. For I testify, this is Revelation 22, verse 18. For I testify that every man that heareth the words of this prophecy of this book, if any man shall add these things or take away, the plagues will become to him. If any man shall take away from the words of this book, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, right? Or here we go, verse 17. Let him come in a thirst. Let them come here. Let them take the water of life freely. It's encouraging to live right. Even the beginning of Revelation chapter 1, blessed is he that read these words and hear the words of this prophecy and keep that what is written. Is often when you're reading apocalyptic literature, it's not the purpose of apocalyptic literature is not to speculate about what's coming. That's not the purpose of it. That's what we do. We like to construct timetables and stuff like that. That's not the purpose. The purpose of this literature is to change your behavior. You're supposed to hear this and say, okay, now I live different. So there's two major styles or kinds of apocalyptic literature. We're familiar with one. That's the historical. That's what we're familiar with. We're not familiar with the journey type. And I won't go into the journey type because it's controversial. So I'll explain what it is, but I won't go into detail. By historical, what I mean by that is when you think about Daniel, what is Daniel doing? Or when you think about Jubilees or these different books, they're laying out history and saying, hey, all of human history is going to culminate in this one moment, and God's going to make everything right. These apocalypses are about the unfolding of human history. It's these kingdoms that are rising up and falling down. It's these people doing this and this kingdom doing this. It's about real world events. It's about the unfolding of history. This is the type that we're most familiar with, right? When you think about Daniel, here's the beast and they represent these kingdoms, or here's this statue and they recommend these they represent these empires, right? Here's the Ancient of Days and this is what's going to happen. We think about Revelation, here's how there's going to be this wars and rumor of wars, and we're going to see these wars unfolding, but we're going to see Jesus coming back with the saints, right? It's talking about what's going to happen. And so when I use history, I'm using history in a sense to refer to like events. It's very what's unfolding in our world in cloaked language, but what's unfolding. The other type you would only know about if you've studied Jewish mysticism. That's the only way you would know about it. Jewish mysticism is classified as apocalypticism, and the reason is basically one type is like, so we talk about history, is about what's going to happen. The other type is I'm having a spiritual journey so that I can have this greater understanding of the world. This is not a course on Jewish mysticism, and so I won't go there. But the reason why I do want to mention it is because Jewish mysticism was around at the time of Jesus. It was around, a very old type. So the modern type is called Kabbalah, so not that, but like an older type. It's called Merkavah mysticism, which is Hebrew for chariots. So chariot mysticism. And it's based off Ezekiel. So when you read Ezekiel, and he's having this incredible vision of, it's like from the waist up, it's glowing sun, and from the waist down, you're seated on this chariot that has four beings that are moving the chariot. So it's a mobile chariot being carried by cherubs, and there's lightning everywhere. We think it's lightning. It's a word that we don't really know. It's flying everywhere. It's these beings, the Aphanim, and it's this whole experience. Ezekiel saw this and then passes out. Right? It's this, oh my goodness. These mystics read Ezekiel as like, cool, I want that. And so what they do is fast, secret chants, and they work themselves into a spiritual state so they can go into the spiritual world and traverse different levels and then experience God. That's Merkavah mysticism. I'm grossly oversimplifying it, but basically the idea is apocalypticism is God comes to me. Jewish mysticism is I go to where God is. I'm going to the throne of God, which is a very dangerous, perilous journey. So it's not easy to do. So that's another version. The reason why I wanted to even bring that up, and it's primarily because I believe that the followers of Jesus was aware of this. And I want you to be aware of these concepts, because you're gonna hear, if you're like in scholarship and reading like commentaries, there's a movement within scholarship. They believe that Paul was a Jewish mystic previously, right? Because remember in Corinthians it said he was caught up into the third heaven, right? So it's this layered spiritual world, and he's traveling through. He's having some experiences, and so some people think that before he converted to Christianity, that he was a Jewish mystic himself. I'm not saying that I'm of that opinion. I'm just saying that the writers of the Bible were familiar with this and with these ideas. And the reason why I think it's important that we're aware of these, of concepts, of just mysticism generally, is because it didn't take 2 decades for mysticism to get into the church, because it was already in the water. Okay? By 50 AD, 20 years after Jesus, people started becoming mystics and Gnostics. Within 20 years. By time you get to like 120, 150, so within 100 years of Jesus, a fully, completely developed idea of mysticism exists. Within 100 years of Jesus. To put that in perspective, 100 years is longer ago for us. So that when the Spirit outpouring happened in America for the first time, that was 125 years ago. So less than that amount of time, okay? Just 100 years, a full religious system developed. So early that when people went into the city, if you asked for where the Christians are, you had to clarify, I mean not the Gnostic and mystic ones. Because it wasn't a small number, it was a massive number of Christians were mystics. So these ideas were around. And the reason, and so that, if I could put it in this way, there's a cultural stream that exists in Judaism. There's a cultural stream. There's the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Qumran community. We have mysticism. We have the fact that they're oppressed. We have the honor-shame society, everything we've been talking about. This is the cultural world that they're inhabiting. And from this, and I'm going to add messianism, the concept of a Messiah, so add that to the mix too. And from all of this does Christianity emerge. And so having a general knowledge of some of the things help you understand the kind of the assumed knowledge that some of the authors might have had, or at least were familiar with. Okay. I'm going to move on to just describing apocalypticism as a movement. So as a literature, this is what it is. It's literature, it's you're receiving a revelation that's being mediated by a divine being so you can understand the keys to the universe. It's the definition. There's 2 major types. Historical, which is what we're familiar with, so like Daniel 7 or like the book of Revelation. It's explaining events that are going to unfold, or it can give you understanding of events that have unfolded. Then there's the type that's called journeys. That's like mysticism. I'm going to go through this spiritual journey so I can get a revelation. Okay. So this is the literature that came into being during and after the exile, the captivity. And downstream from that would be a movement. So there's apocalyptic literature, but then there's a movement that came subsequent to that. A movement might reasonably be called apocalyptic if it shared certain ideas and frameworks that could come and relate to the literature. I want to give you a couple of these. And if you hear these, and this is from a German scholar, his name is Klaus Koch. And he said, here are some of the characteristics of apocalyptic movements. And what you'll realize is a lot of this just sounds like Christianity. Some scholars, and these are usually atheist scholars, they'll say that Christianity is just apocalyptic Judaism, is how they will describe it. So listen to some of these characteristics. urgent expectation of the end. That's us, right? The end is going to be this big cosmic catastrophe, right? Armageddon, right? The activity of angels and demons, a very active spiritual world. We talk about principalities like every other Sunday, right? In apostolic churches. And we do that in casting out devils, like activity. New salvation, usually described as a paradise. New heaven and earth. There's a tree of life in it. It's paradise, right? Manifestation of the kingdom of God. Literally Jesus' message. A mediator with royal functions, like a Messiah king who's going to come and mediate this whole thing. And a strong emphasis on the word glory. That's a little more hidden, but it's a big thing too. So basically, Christianity. Those descriptions, see, this is what I'm trying to get at. Everything I described, you just would assume is a part of Christianity. This is what I mean with, if you take all the apocalyptic elements out of Christianity, it doesn't exist. This is how crucial this intellectual background is, because it literally shaped our faith. So, what I want to do I'm trying to think about how I want to do this. Did you that list? Could you share that list? That's Roman numeral 3C. We'll share that list. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the last point. My last point's the biggest point. That's why I'm trying to rush to it. So I have 30 minutes. And that's honestly probably still not enough time, but I don't care. We're going to finish tonight. By that, I mean I'll cut stuff out if I have to. So what I want to do is show, I'm going to pick a couple of the characteristics from that list. And I'm going to show you some verses so you can see it in practice. While Journey's sending that, I use good old Chat GPT to help me out with a little exercise. I said, excluding Revelation, how many verses in our New Testament contain apocalyptic characteristics or messaging? And the number that it came up was over 200 verses. If you include Revelation, that number jumps to 400. It's a massive amount of material. A massive amount of material. So I'll just give you just a couple of examples, right? So urgent expectation of the end. Look at this, 2 Peter chapter 3. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, and in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. And earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of person ought ye to be That's all right. For those online, it started making a weird noise with the sound system. We're going to ignore it. Ought to be in all holy conversation and in godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of the Lord, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heaven and a new earth wherein we dwelleth righteousness. We see the elements there. Our expectation. I don't know how often you think about this. Peter is saying, this is what you should expect. Our physical world is going to be renovated by fire. I don't think this is supposed to be read symbolically. Now, he might not understand. Maybe there could be some things he might not understand. but he's trying to capture his understanding of the future of this world. So even if it's not a literal fire, it's something like destruction. He said, this physical world that you see is going to be completely destroyed. It's going to be renovated entirely. And then there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and that's where our residence is going to be. It's going to be different. But if we're going to be in this new heaven and new earth, we need to think about what Paul says in Corinthians 15. I don't have it, but that's fine. That means we're going to be resurrected. We're going to have new bodies. We have bodies that are terrestrial, but we're going to get celestial bodies. That's Corinthians. That's what he says. You have a terrestrial body now, but you're going to have a celestial body. Like, it sounds strange. But this is our faith. This is what's happening. He said you're going to shed mortality and put on immortality. You were once perishable. Now you're going to be imperishable. And so, like, think about it. We think about just heaven, but this is our hope as Christians. We believe that the physical world is going to be radically changed as we know it. And then our bodies are going to have a metamorphosis of some sort. And then we're just going to live forever. Have you tried pitching that to somebody who has no Christian background? You sound crazy. Like, you're all initiated, so you rock with Christianity. But imagine going to somebody who's never heard this before. So the world's going to be set on fire, but that's okay because a new planet's going to come. And then we're going to live on this new planet with bodies that don't die. That sounds crazy. That's our Bible. That's apocalypticism. That's apocalyptic. That's Christianity. Right? I don't think that's how you forward your evangelism, but you could if you wanted. Think about this. We are going to have this new reality, this paradise-like reality that we're going to experience. Revelation 22, he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, there was the tree of life, which bare 12 manners of fruits and yielded every fruit every month. Yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for healing of the nations. What are we talking about here? Are these magic leaves that heals diseases? What's happening? We're going to be in a paradise with trees that don't go out of season, so they produce fruit to feed everybody year round. And then the leaves have healing properties. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads, and there shall be no night there, and no need for candle, neither light of the sun. For the Lord God giveth them light, and he shall reign forever and ever. Whatever this paradise, there's just going to be no darkness, just gone. No darkness. Now, obviously, Revelation is very symbolic, right? So there's a level of symbolism that's happening here. But this is your hope. This is the stuff that Paul says, read this and be encouraged. Yeah, we want the time where nighttime disappears because, and there's no sun because the light just comes from God and we're all good. Oh, and by the way, your God's name is going to be written on your forehead. That's your encouragement. That's your hope. A version of reality that's radically different than what you're experiencing today. That's apocalyptic. Right? This is very different. And because that this was so integrated into Christianity, it wildly impacted the lifestyle and the ethic of the first century church. They had what I like to call an apocalyptic ethic. Their way of living their way of thinking, their way of being was shaped by these weird ideas. Like these weird ideas radicalized these people. They thought so differently. For example, they believed sincerely in a dynamic and real spiritual world. And it touched every moment of their life. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, it says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. They took that serious. If there was sickness happening in their house, it was equally true that it could be natural causes or something spiritual. If there's a great catastrophe that happened, they're like, okay, I know what I need to do right now. So, for example, let's say there's wars going on and there's nation rising against nation. They're like, okay, the spiritual world is active. We need to go to prayer. A wildfire happens in California. They're like, okay, we need to repent. The sin of the nation has brought the wrath of God. Oh, there's a water drought that's happening. All these droughts and stuff. All these natural disasters are happening in California. You know, if you were, they would spiritualize it. They would say it was because there's a bunch of sin in California and God is judging California. Now, maybe I'm a little too modern, right? But an ancient person would see this and be like, they have earthquakes and water shortages and famines. Sounds like Exodus to me. These people are under the judgment of God. They need to pray. They need to call a national. You know what the state of California needs? They need to have a statewide time of prayer and fasting, and maybe God will turn his face back to them, because these realities were so real to them. When they saw these natural disasters happening, we need to do something radically different to get God's attention. That's how they lived. Another way that this ethic impacted them was Romans 13. They were, I don't want to say possessed. They were not enamored. I'm trying to think of the word. They were gripped. They were affected deeply by the coming of Jesus. They lived every day. Every single moment of their life, they lived believing, not only do I not know when Jesus is coming back, it's happening soon. It's not just that it's happening soon, like, how can I plan for children and grandchildren? Because this is happening tomorrow. Like a thief in the night, he's coming. And they were persuaded, believed it. They didn't just think that, okay, here's these timelines and here's how long a generation is, and we can. It was none of that. I'm not trying to be disparaging of anybody. That's not my. They believe, like, legit, it could be tonight. It could be in the next 30 minutes. I don't know. Romans 13:11 says this, and that knowing the time, that now is high time to awake out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. For them, every moment that passed produced greater and greater and greater feelings of urgency. Because they said every second that passes, I'm another moment closer to his soon return. And so the urgency that was in them from the moment of their conversion until their death. Imagine this sense of, could you imagine living that way? None of us here do, but you should try it for a week. It'd be an emotionally, it would drive you up a wall emotionally. From moment to moment, every moment that passed by, their sense of his coming, that feeling grew into more and more intense and more intense and more intense. And depending on their temperament, if you have a certain temperament, that might produce some anxiety. Like, dude, he could literally come tomorrow. But I think it's that urgency that touched their evangelism. The reason why they evangelized the way that they did is because I have until tomorrow to reach the whole world. And they lived like it. I have until next week to reach. Paul went into Ephesus and like, bro, I got 1 week to reach Ephesus. It's game time. That's why traveling through stops at Athens and he's stirred up. I'm not even here for missions work. But while I'm here, I never know. Man starts preaching in Athens because it could be tomorrow. We don't believe that, bro. We don't live with that same urgency, and I think that makes us significantly different than that first century church. They were truly apocalyptic, and I don't think we are. Because we have Roth IRAs, and I want to leave some for my second and third generation. And I'm not saying all that's bad, but, you know, we're worrying about this thing and that thing, and we're caught up in this and caught up in that. And we get into a beef with somebody, and it's the end of the world, and everything's the end of the world. When we measure these events versus his return, everything becomes vanishingly small. That's why Paul says all of this is a light affliction, because he was thinking about the glory to come. This is an apocalyptic ethic, radically different. It changes us. It can't help but change us. One more set of verses, then I think I'll be able to end early, because I want to maybe open up for some questions. I'll read two passages, 2 Corinthians 5, and then we'll look at Revelation 20. 2 Corinthians 5, it says this, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body, according to that he hath done, whether good or bad. Knowing therefore the terror of the Lord, we persuade men." They understood that judgment was coming. Everybody is going to be judged. Revelation 20, it says it like this, "I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, whose face the earth and heaven fled away. But there was no place to hide. And I saw the dead, both small and great, they stood before God. And the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the book of life, in the book according to their works." This gripped that church so deeply. They said, there is going to come a moment that the face of the one that heaven and earth flees from, the gaze of God would cause mountains to leap. The very glory of God would cause the heavens to roll up like a scroll. And every human has to stand before that being. And that is utterly terrifying. And they said, I know the terror of the Lord. I know. I'm going to stand before that God. And I'm going to be judged. Because did I share the gospel? Did I repent? What were my good deeds? What were my bad deeds? Did I use my talents appropriately? This is living apocalyptically, because they knew that I am going to stand before a terrifying God. And they said, knowing that terror, knowing that fear, it's a dreadful thing. It's dreadful. They read their Bible. They saw it. Daniel, Ezekiel, all these different ones. When Isaiah, I'm a man of unclean lips, when they were in this presence, they were floored. They were frightened. They became as dead men. That was in a vision. But in that day of judgment, this is not an apparition. It's not a vision. It's not a spiritual journey. I am going to be face to face with that terror. And that ought to move you. That ought to do something to you. There's no space for our pride. There's no space for feelings getting hurt. There's no space for little offenses. There's no space for that when we think about the terror of standing before him face to face. This is how they lived. It was this reality that challenged them moment to moment. This is the apocalyptic ethic. And more than anything, if I could take a page from their book, I'm not pressed about timelines. I'm not pressed with trying to figure out all the symbols. But I want to encourage you the same way that they would. More than understanding the depths of the visions of Daniel, how are you going to live in light of that reality? I might not be the best teacher of the book of Revelation, but what I want to encourage is, how are you going to live in light of its truth? I might not be the best at understanding this concept, but I know one thing. How are we going to live knowing that Jesus could come at any moment? And that same Jesus has the power to completely renovate this world. And I don't need to be fearful of who can kill the body, but it's the one that can destroy the soul. How am I going to let this truth, these truths, how is it going to move me? How is it going to change the course of my life right here, right now? October 15th, right? 7:53. How is what I am thinking about and meditating and hearing, how is what I'm hearing going to change who I am? Because that's what it did for the first church, and that's what it needs to do for us here. With that, I'm going to call it quits. In a rare feat of the miraculous, I finished 6 minutes early. So I'm going to open up for questions, something you want clarified, maybe something that wasn't clear. It's okay if you have a question. Somebody else has the same question. Man, I must have knocked it out the park tonight. I mean, just perfectly done. Or so bad that you don't know what to ask. One of the two, we're somewhere in that spectrum. You all are on the spectrum tonight. That's called a double entendre. All right. Thank you. It's like, and that makes sense with just how this literature emerged. They were in exile, the toughest time of their life, and they had to make sense of where they were. And how they made sense of it was, what's going on here is not all there is. There has to be so much more. And when it's all said and done, God is just and he's going to handle it all. That's apocalypticism was, you can mean this in a positive or a negative way, but it was their coping strategy. You can mean that positively or negatively. I do mean it positively. I don't mean, as a skeptic would say, it's copium, but I'm not a skeptic. But that's how they managed life and the stresses of it, was not just that I'm going to have this. It feels more vindictive than it's supposed to sound, but it's not just that I have heaven and I'm going to be forever with the Lord. It's also he's going to right every wrong. It's like the people who didn't act right and never repented. Bless you. There's going to be justice, and that's supposed to give you comfort, because you can't always exercise justice. You can't always fix every problem. So. Yes. Like, for example, anything to do with the afterlife is basically apocalypticism, basically. Like, our concepts of resurrection, new heaven and new earth, ruling and reigning with him, the concept of judgment, all of that would be considered apocalyptic by scholars. Yeah, and that's not even unique to apostolic, that's just being a Christian. It's that again. That was 2 questions. Read just the first one. What will be the second question? Yeah. Okay. The way that it could serve us is, for me, it's a matter of proper interpretation of the Bible. I'm persuaded that there is no such thing as reading the Bible objectively. We all have a bias. So the goal is to have the proper bias. And what I want is to think about the Bible as a first century Jewish person would. I think that would help me best interpret the text. And some of these ideas would have been consciously or unconsciously in the mind of a first century Jew is what I'm thinking. So I think that's how it would make you more capable of better catching some of the subtleties and nuances of interpretation. What do they mean by other points? I'm not quite sure. Like, what do they mean by other points? I'm not sure. If so, to wax a little long, I could say this: there are other apocalyptic texts that exist, but most of it's like apocryphal stuff. So, but I think it'd be worth reading some of it. I can give some suggestions of things I think would be useful. Oh, the mystic view, how'd that be helpful? I don't have my thoughts fully formulated on that quite yet. I've been studying Jewish mysticism for a while. I think what I'm intrigued about is why so quickly so many Christians gravitated to mysticism so quickly. Like, we have discovered literature. Like, I want you to think about this. Outside of the Bible, the literature about Christianity that we have, that like in volume, like what some of the biggest things that we have is Christian mysticism. There's a thing called the Nag Hammadi library, right? That's like from the years 100 to 200. There's just so much stuff in there. right? There's a lot of these ideas emerged so quickly and so fast, and like so many Christians just gravitated to that. Like it was like a huge thing, and I'm like, why? And I'm curious to why. So that's because I think that's why I would want to understand. Why is it that so many people were interested in it? There must have been some appeal, and what I'm not versed enough in is, are there elements in our New Testament that could be perceived as mystical in nature? Um, I would want to be able to identify those. Once again, I'm not encouraging or condoning mysticism. Oh, fun fact, if you didn't know, people who attack apostolics, they call us mystical, where we've been called mystics because of our Pentecostal practices. So if you're people who are like people who are against a lot of the charismatic sort of world, they describe our experience as mystical. So we've been attacked as such. Okay. Okay, so mysticism takes on a whole nother meaning. I think a little bit further on we get uh, his definition of mysticism is probably similar to like the Greek Orthodox definition. So like Greek Orthodox are considered mystics, and so it's the influence of Platonism and Neoplatonism. So it's this idea that if I, through prayer and meditation, there's a union that can happen with God. There's a union that can happen with God through prayer and meditation. And so it's so that's a part of it, but two is an openness to spiritual experiences. So I have an openness that God can. What make him different though, because he's Jewish, is they approach their version of mysticism by, I can't know anything, so by withholding all of my assumptions, I'll have an experience. But true, like Jewish theology, by its nature, God is very involved and he wants to be known. And so if I'm open to that, God wants to be known, he does interact with this world, and he's deeply concerned, I can have an experience of him. If I had to guess, I'm not Abraham Heschel, but yeah, but that would be my guess. It's there's mysticism happens in stages. Yeah, it happens in stages. So that would make you you wouldn't to use less scary language. You have a similar ideology to like not doctrine wise, but like some undergirding assumptions that were probably similar to like Greek Orthodox. And so they use the word mystic, but they don't mean it. They don't mean the word mystic the way mystic is being used here. Mystic just means I'm open to experiencing the presence of God, which is just true of Pentecostals generally. That's all it means. And so the word has words adapt meaning through time. And so what he means by it is different than what's meant here. Like what they mean here is I'm literally going to have a experience where my soul more or less astral planes into the throne of God. Like that's what they're talking about. Like I am going to go into the actual throne of God. And it developed to, and I want to measure his body and stuff like that. Yeah. Specifically in Persian units called a parang. Yes, I would. Mm. Okay. Yeah. I forgot the quote. I heard it from Brother Brown. It was like an incredible quote. Uh, I think the quote was something like this: "Live like he's coming tomorrow, but plan like he'll be here in 100 years." You wouldn't do both. Live day to day as if he's coming tomorrow, but plan for he's going to come in 100 years. And so it's a both and. You wouldn't be responsible. Because the Old Testament, the wisdom of the Old Testament is very much about getting your affairs ordered here. You can even think about like the Pilgrims and their understanding of Christianity. They work was sacred. Like there's a way in which you were living out the will of God and the call of God by being incredible at your job and preparing here and how you manage your life. And so there's some sentiments to that in the New Testament, right? Where it talks about the talents. Like the talents definitely apply to like the gospel and sharing the gospel and our work for God, but also applies to our personal life. Whatever God's given us to rule over, we should rule with diligence and rule well. So that improves our national and our spiritual life. Paul also talks about having a good reputation to them that are without. Talk about non-church people. There's no better way to have a good reputation than to have an orderly life. It's really hard to be an effective witness when your personal life is in disarray all the time. Not that you can, but it's certainly more challenging. So it's a both and. It's a difficult tightrope to balance. That'd be my practical application as a pastor. I don't think Paul will agree with me. I think Paul would disagree with me. I think Paul would just be like, there is no tomorrow. Live like he's coming today. That's why he said, if you're single, it's better to remain single. Don't get married. Paul believed it. He said, don't get married. He told people, don't get married. And he said, but if you don't have any self-control and you can't control your appetite, then go and get married. But like that's lesser. Like don't do that. So Paul would disagree with me actually. But I'm not Paul. And I don't think all the biblical authors would side with Paul. Okay, so like day of the Lord, that phrase. So day of the Lord, when we're thinking about anything about non-physical reality. Non-physical reality. So like we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against princes and principalities and all that. So like anything concerning the non-physical, that's a good one. Anything concerning end time stuff, like things to come. So in the language, like you could open, let's say Matthew 24. That says Olivet Discourse, right? So Matthew 24. So like the phrases like the end, right? We're looking for the end, tribulations, false prophets is a big time for the end times. Just basically, lots of the language concerning the end times. When you get into the realm of super symbolic, like that's just particularly apocalyptic in like literature, for example. So when you like Revelation, like that really symbolic language, that's where you're at. And that's something that I would like to present to the church at some point. I've been thinking about it for some time. The last days began at Pentecost. It's the now and not yet. We are in the midst of the unfolding of prophetic realities. Like the times that we're living in. And then we're in the 11th hour. you could say, right? And so we are in a time of just great cosmic upheaval. Like, we're in the thick of it, right? And so we're like a lot of that, we're in it right now, I would say. We're there. Like cosmic, big picture, not like individual so much, like cosmic. Yeah. That's the feeling of the questions dying down. Okay. Alrighty. Well, with that, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Hopefully, this was helpful. I have one more in this series about understanding the New Testament, and that's going to be the exploring the concept of Messiah. Where did that come from? Where did these ideas come from? Was there a messianic hope in the time of Jesus? I think so. But apparently, the scholar I'm reading completely doesn't think so. But we're going to talk about Messiah next week, and then I'm going to move on to whatever the Lord has for us. With that, thank you.